Massive thank you as always to patrons Sarah Turner, Rebecca Johns and Justin Harper. And this week's random call out goes to patron Brenda Ramos. You can support us too at patreon.com/It's Not Just In Your Head or follow us on social media and help spread the word. Today, psychotherapist Harriet Fraud and substance abuse counsellor Ikoi Hiro talk to Let Me Explain, author of the book Block, Delete, Move On. A qualified social worker and dating and relationships educator, she left her 15-year career in the public sector in 2018 to bring her professional knowledge to social media and has a loyal following of close to 200,000 on Instagram. Whilst the book and this episode's focus is on heterosexual relationships, the hope is that this discussion has some relevance to everyone. But do let us know what you think, either way, by emailing us at itsnotjustinyourhead@gmail.com.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head. Just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
We can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
The initial question I ask is what made you jump from going into social work and changing into giving dating advice?
Well, it's an interesting question, really, because I kind of feel like I'm still doing social work, just in a different form.
Right.
I'm still a registered social worker and licensed social worker, but obviously I'm not doing in the same statutory way that I was doing it before. But I do still consider the work that I do on Instagram social work, probably social work training, I guess. And really, I guess dating, the term dating sounds kind of, I don't know, I guess a bit sort of glib and lighthearted and whatever. But in my role as a social worker, I mean, at least 60 to 80% of the cases that we dealt with, even if domestic violence wasn't at the heart of the referral, it was a feature somewhere, and romantic relationships in some form were always a feature of the cases. So it almost felt like rather than wanting to be the person who fixes it when it all goes wrong and horrifically wrong in an abusive way, I wanted to jump right to the start of that and try to prevent any of these relationships happening that would then eventually lead to social work intervention. So that's kind of my aim.
I wanted to ask a bunch of questions, but I'll start with one, of course. And that one is, where do you see the connection between romance and misogyny that seems like such an intimate connection in your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't escape the patriarchy. And for me, certainly, it wasn't until I understood the role that misogyny played in my dating experiences as a heterosexual woman that I could start really understanding how to forgive myself, I guess, for a lot of things, and understanding how much my gender impacted on the experiences that I was having, and not just because it was me and I was totally flawed. My tendency was to kind of self-blame when things went wrong, like I caused it. And it wasn't until I started studying social work and understanding more about feminism and understanding more about the way that society perceived me simply because I have a vagina, that was when it was like all the pennies dropped. I was like, okay, this being led into sexual relationships where the other, where the man knew that he only wanted sex, but I'd been kind of made to believe that I was special or whatever. When those situations happened, I always felt like, well, I wasn't good enough to keep him. I never understood how deeply misogyny was rooted in that, using women's bodies as masturbatory tools. Lots of things like just even the way I changed myself, like instead of putting myself forward as a intelligent woman with a good education and, a funny woman and all the things that I am, I very intentionally left all of those things at the door and dated as a woman who was like, look, I can cook. Look, I go to the gym. Look, I've got great boobs, and again, misogyny really underpinned that, because I felt that I had to mold myself into being the woman that society told me I had to be in order to be successful at finding love.
That's really important. And it reminds me of another question that I have, which is you describe wonderfully, although you're describing something terrible, the attitudes of wealthy males going to the estates, the poor areas, and using the women there for sex with particular contempt, which is class contempt combined with contempt for women. And I wondered if you could talk about that duet that they dance of class contempt and misogyny.
The first time I ever really spotted that and experienced that, I was, before I was a social worker, I was a sexual health and relationships educator for the NHS. And we used to teach young people between the ages of 11 and 24 in lots of different settings. So sometimes we were in youth offending institutes or in schools, colleges, all sorts of places. And one time we did our sessions in a grammar school, like a fee-paying school. So normally the places that I would visit were state funded, and would cater to a mix of children, and very often working class children or children and young people. And we went for the first time to a very, very privileged school. And I was taken aback and just saddened by the attitudes of the boys in this school, who not only treated me with such contempt. I'm a working class woman, and you can probably hear that in my voice. I don't know if that translates in for somebody in the USA who, accents may not pick up, but I'm very not visibly you can hear that I'm a working class woman. And the way that they treated me when I stepped in there, and as soon as I opened my mouth, they were smirking at each other. They instantly had, they were kids, they were teenagers, like 14-year-olds, and they had such a sense of superiority over me. There was nothing that I could say that they didn't want to put their hands up and counteract in some way. And throughout the session, they just kept making comments about, we were talking about sexually transmitted infections, and they just kept making comments about chavs and how easy it was to sleep with chavs. But if you're going to do that, then you have to wear a condom, because they've definitely, they've all got diseases. And if you want an easy blowjob, just go down to the local council estate, and that's where you can get one. And I remember just leaving there feeling like the worst. These are the worst people that I've encountered in my entire career. And can I swear?
Of course.
Yeah. Fucked up thing is that these are the people who are probably more likely than anyone else I've met to go on and be making laws and writing policies and running this country in some way,
Boris Johnson. Yes.
Well, exactly. You can, and you see it. That it's, sexism and misogyny is definitely. I mean, it spans through all the classes, but in very different ways. And I think that the horrible part of it being so inherent in privileged male society is that they also have power, and that's a very scary thing.
Now, when you say chavs, what does that mean? And I don't know that expression.
A chav is like a horrible term, basically, for working class people. There used to be quite a lot of sort of comedy around it, I guess. There were characters in really big comedy program called Little Britain, they used to have this girl called Vicky Pollard, and she sort of represented young women who lived on council estates. And it was big gold hoop earrings and ill-fitting Adidas tracksuits, and they'd have a pram with several babies, all of different ethnicities in the pram. It was a kind of mockery of everything that was, the identifying features, I guess you'd say, of somebody who was working class or not even working class. I guess in Britain we have like a benefit class. I don't know if that's the right
Poor
way
people.
of saying it. Yeah, I guess
welfare
poor people.
class.
Yeah, the welfare class. And so chavs is kind of a derogatory term for, the welfare class.
Well, it looks like, hearing you, that what they do is group the contemptible, and so that they have contempt for anyone who isn't rich, which reinforces their position in society as superior, combined with their sense of superiority as males in society, to have double contempt for the women they callously fuck. However, it is interesting that these same privileged men, who no doubt have that same attitude in the US, certainly, George Bush's escapades at Yale, where they used to hire Black prostitutes from the poorer neighborhoods in New Haven for their secret society parties. And those were women for whom they had contempt. So they had racial contempt, class contempt, and also male supremacist contempt. Is that those same men rape the girls in preschool, like Kavanaugh, our Supreme Court justice.
Sorry,
and
that was
also
me.
There was a scandal in the United States where a resident at St. Paul's, a very expensive boarding school in the United States, raped a younger woman. And it turned out that he did that before, on a certain day that was designated as the day that you had to have sex with a woman, at, whether she was willing or not, in order to be included in the celebration of that day. And that was St. Paul's, but the contempt and callousness towards the feelings of the other human didn't have a class connotation as well. And one wonders what happened to eliminate half the population in consideration as human, because you really can't rape somebody if you think about their feelings. You wonder what social mechanism is there to reduce women to a subhuman level.
It's interesting because sometimes I get messages from men. I've had them a handful of times in my DMs on Instagram, and they've been trying to be nice. Supposedly a positive message, and they've said things like, since following your page, I've learned that women are actually human. And I'm like, I'm like, whoa, what's happened here? But I think there's so many contributing factors to that, isn't there? It's just because, if we go back in history, our position was always just a baby maker and a sandwich maker. And that was pretty much it. And I think that things have become. Have you read Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates?
Yes, I have.
It's such a brilliant book, and I think it really encapsulates how deep the anti-women feeling is, and a lot of the incel culture is all about they name women as they've got like weird name, femoids or something, and they've got all these weird names which are specifically names that seek to completely dehumanize us, and they talk, that's the language that they talk in, and it's just very normalized. And I think porn has a lot to answer for, because again, you know, the sex that a lot of men are exposed to is sex that isn't about feeling. It doesn't show a woman with any, you know, any physical or emotional feelings. She's just a sex toy, and I think it's very complex, and I don't think we're ever going to be able to change it. I have no hope for that.
I think so, because I think it's less in those countries where women are independently or economically independent, and because there's that very good book by Kristen Godsey, who we had on this program, Why Is Sex Better Under Socialism?, where she talks about the sex is better because women know what they want and can ask for it when they're not economically dependent. That's part of her argument. But also, I've been impressed by reading about sex education in the Netherlands and in Denmark, Sweden, Scandinavian countries, where they mainly talk about feelings. And they start in kindergarten, how you like to hug and how that feels nice. And then in middle school, about their various organs, and in high school, about their relationships and what gives them an orgasm and what helps their partner have an orgasm, and what do they owe their partner, and what do they owe any life they could create. It's a relational, it's not a sex biological education. Not that the United States has that. That's only
yeah, I was just about to say, yeah.
I'd be really interested. I'd be so interested to have a look at Netherlands and Scandinavian Pornhub searches, and I'd like to see the type of porn that the boys go on to consume as a result, you know, with that sex education in the background.
They're all reading books whilst they screw.
You know, I think part of it is that the need to go to porn for sex education is less if you have ample sex education at your school. The puritanical restraint invites abuse. And in the US, there's only 17 states out of 50 that have biologically correct sex education, and none that have relational sex education, building relationships, building intimacy. And I think that would make a huge difference. But, you know, in having to be humiliating someone sexually and gaining ascendancy over your own disgusting desire, which is sold as disgusting.
Part of the problem that I face online is that there's this weird group of weird's not the right word, but there is whenever I talk about abusive sex, rough sex that does not serve women, non-consensual choking, non-consensual harming within the bedroom, slapping, spitting, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I cannot speak about that online without getting a barrage of backlash from women mainly, who claim to be from the kink community, and who are saying that, who say to me, well, hey, look, what you're doing here is you're actually really damaging our community. This is kink, and some people really enjoy this. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not talking about consensual. I'm talking about non-consensual. There is a big difference. But they are really, they shut down any kind of conversation because they're like, well, yeah, that's fine if you're talking about non-consensual, but still the way you're talking about it brings shame to our community. And it's my view is that BDSM has absolutely been co-opted by abusive men in order to legitimize their abuse. And then we have this kind of large section of women who are then kind of standing up for that and, you know, almost applauding them for it and protecting them. And so it's, you know, this, it's not as easy as just going, look, let's have this discussion. There are so many different voices in the discussion that throw it off track. And I think the whole co-opting of BDSM is a really important conversation to have, because I think a lot of women are getting into bed with men who appear very nice and then do really horrible things in bed. But these women think, well, this is a type of sex. This is a legitimate and valid type of sex that I'm having. They don't see that it's rooted in, like, this man's desire to harm you, Yeah,
well, I do think that one of the things that's enacted in that is dominance and subordination on a sexual level. And so that sex, which is associated with shame, I think it's significant. Remember reading that there was no rape on the island of Tahiti till the missionaries got there. And rape was considered right there with murder in the Iroquois community before the missionaries got there and the United States basically colonized them. That because the idea was that women are human and on the wisdom councils and all the rest, and so that's really a terrible violation, that dominance and subordination enactment. And at least in my long experience as an old psychotherapist, the clients that I've had who are into BDSM felt that abuse was inevitable and sex abuse was inevitable. And the appeal of BDSM was that there were control words so that you could do something about the inevitable, which is a terrible commentary about the relationships of dominance and subordination, usually that happen in the family, then conveyed into people's independent lives.
That's the same sort of thing that I hear a lot from women who have experienced rape or sexual abuse and who then go on to be quite promiscuous, have lots of one night stands and lots of casual sex, is that it is that feeling of control. It's like, well, if I'm just going to fuck you and leave, then you can't just fuck me and leave, or you can't, I'm in complete control of this. But again, it's one of those things where everything I seem to sort of say online is counteracted with a huge backlash, because if I've had those conversations, because I don't think casual sex serves heterosexual women very well. No. Not because I think casual sex is bad. I think we should all go forth and fuck if we want to. But I also think that for most women, I think it's about 18% of women are likely to orgasm during a casual sex encounter. It's I just don't think it's really made for us. I think, for a man, you're going to go into it, you're probably going to come. We're probably not, and we have a lot more to think about if things go wrong. Not only the scary side of that, but also, pregnancy and things like that. And when you try to have discussions to say, actually, should we think about this? Should we think about how casual sex doesn't really serve women? And should we think about maybe why we're doing it and why we're doing it may be rooted in bad experiences that we've had with men before, or low self-esteem, or, chasing validation or whatever. Again, there's this whole no, sexual liberation, stop shaming women for casual sex. It's like, I'm not shaming women for casual sex, but if we don't think about all the stuff that's behind this, then women are going to continue to be having bad sexual experiences with horrible men. But I think that's, it's very, when I was a social worker and I wasn't operating online, I was able to stand in what I said. And now, now that I do it online, there's 1,000 different voices all wanting to tell you that you're wrong in some way, which makes it very difficult to really get a grip on what I think are incredibly important conversations that really need thought and that might trigger people, but it's just very difficult to have them online.
Well, part of the problem is women are trained not to say what they want in every area, but particularly sexually. And so, of course, a casual encounter where you don't know or trust the person and you're probably having sex to please him is not going to be a time when you feel that you have a right to say what you want sexually and that he should perform it. And so women get fucked, that's all. And I think that there is a whole response. I do remember this quotation from Harriet Tubman, who led all these people out of slavery. She led 400 people out of slavery. And when she was interviewed, in one interview, she said, I could have led 4,000 if they were willing to give up being slaves. And I think a lot of women are defensive about trying to be pleasing because our parents and our society has inculcated this idea that we are the pleasers. And I think one of the reasons that Kristen Godsey's comparison about the German GDR, East Germany versus West Germany, and the differences when the wall fell was if you have independent people who can support themselves and a state that supports children, even though it was a horribly repressive state, supported women and children. And socialists are much better about equality, period. And that's who the Paris Commune was the first place in the world in 1871 where women were equal and were commanders and governors and everything. That
Western,
Western. That is right.
Yes.
Thank you very much. But that there is this whole legacy that ends up being enacted in the bedroom of conquering need through women, conquering your sexuality through women. And it's a sick legacy. And in some countries, they are taking it down. I mean, in Sweden, and I think also in the Netherlands, they don't have gender. They're trying to eliminate gender starting in preschool, where they don't use the gender pronouns. They use people's names. And because they don't want people to split up by gender. And they have a whole commitment to that. Where we sure don't,
Has there been any research on whether that's impacting on like abuse in schools, or I mean, if it's fairly recent and they're only just doing it now in like nursery age? I wonder if it's been long enough. But it would be very interesting to see, because when I both as a social worker and a sexual health educator, it's I saw how early it started.
It does start early.
So early.
Between 1.5 and 3 years old, a child develops a permanent gender identity, after which, if you try to change it, because sometimes children are born with ambiguous genitals, and so they're brought up as one thing, but they're actually chromosomally and hormonally a different sex, you mess them up for life. It's a very basic identification in our gender-divided society. I know one of the things they're doing in Norway, which I was very interested in, is they have speakers on different topics that have nothing to do with sex and who are naked, fat people, thin people, and so on. So the kids can see in the assembly, okay, they're people with sex organs, but they're talking about the history of spacecraft or something.
Well, it's normalizing, the human body, right? That's the attempt.
Right. That's right.
That does seem a bit wild.
It does. I mean,
not sure that I want my
naked.
son's teachers to be doing maths naked.
No, although if that were part of a whole impulse towards equality, it would be understood differently from the way we understand it.
Yeah.
There's context to all these things that you remove certain things out of context and it doesn't necessarily make sense, but within a larger ecosystem it makes a lot more sense.
Yes,
because that is one of the there's a lot of conflict within So like, when I said earlier dating, that does sound a little bit diminishing, but dating is a huge
Issue.
aspect of the adult life, right? Like as you
It
become
is.
an adult, as you're growing up, it is like, the first, well, I mean, to a certain degree, it's your romantic partnership is one of the most important relationships, and also one of the most legally binding relationships that you'll have in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it, the legal binding makes kind of, a significant difference in a lot of ways. So, to a certain degree, like a huge part of your adult life is invested in finding this relationship that works for you.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think that but we mess people up. I mean, I'm 40 now, and I want to go around and tell every 20-year-old that they've got loads of time, and that your life doesn't. Because I remember being kind of late teens and feeling like, right, well, got to get a man, and that's the most important thing in it that will ever happen to me. Forget a career, I probably don't need one if I've got a husband.
Right.
I was indoctrinated into this system of just dependency on men, and my worth and my value being defined by whether I'd been picked by one, and it just didn't occur to me to think about anything else other than trying to be in a relationship at all times, and it always felt like this sort of sense of running out of time. I always had this vision in my head that I'd be married by 25, babies very soon after. And I remember getting to 25, and I was in a relationship then with my son's dad, and it really felt like, well, we've got to have a baby right now. And now I'm 40, and I'm like, I mean, I would probably be better off of having my first child now, and I still very much can. Why was there this? Why did I fall into it? And why did nobody say anything? Why did my mum not say, "Hey, hold up! Like, first of all, you've got lots of time. Second of all, you're going to have a much richer life if you focus it on yourself and exploring the world and learning new things rather than focusing everything on men." Nobody said anything to me.
Right.
It was just normal. It was what we were all doing.
But I think that's changing as men can no longer support women.
Yeah.
In the United States, the majority of women are single. Now, there are those dynamics that are holding on. I think they're holdovers from when women's career was marriage and babies, and you needed to be chosen because women couldn't make their own money and couldn't support themselves. And so that we had to be attractive to men. That is beginning to change, although the beauty industry is pushing that it doesn't. Also, I think dating goes on much longer because separations, there are people separated. The majority of people who actually get married are divorced, and a lot of people don't get married. And so that there's a lot of dating because it goes on all the time as relationships crumble.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Actually, Gen Z, it sounds very patronizing. I was going to say I'm so proud of them. But I think that I speak to so many young women, and I'm like, this is the future. So many more women exploring being queer. So many more women going, I'm asexual, and that's fine as well. But there is still a large section. My DMs are dominated by women feeling bad about themselves because they're perpetually single or on the dating apps all the time, and it's very still pretty misogynistic over on the dating apps. So I still think there is a bit of a legacy, although I think I totally agree. It is changing.
Yeah, the economic basis for it is changing. And I do want to say that I had a client who was becoming an incel, and He's not now because he's no longer imbued with shame over his own need to be sexual. He was so shamed that he hated his own sexuality, and he wanted to dominate it through dominating women.
What was he gay?
No.
Oh, what was his
straight.
shame?
He as a little boy, he liked to hold his cousin's hand, and his mother came down on him, like a falling 10-ton brick building. And he was told that sex was dirty, and his family was very religious Catholic, and sex was a sin. And even if he just wanted to hold hands with someone, and there's an aggressive rage that comes out against women. There was a wonderful thing that happened in New York City about a month ago. School was open again after the pandemic, and there was a strike of middle school girls at the Tompkins Square Public Middle School in the United States. That's 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. There was a strike primarily of women against boys' sexual assaults at school because they'd been home watching porn. And the school, if you reported it, took on that particular incident, but did not take on the phenomenon. So there was a walkout of mainly women, but also some male students in protest against unaddressed sexual assault as a phenomenon. And these were girls in 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Although they had, some advisors. There was a woman who called the press, who was a teacher, and other teachers helped them. But it was the kids, which I thought was such a wonderful thing.
Was it to do with, because we had something really similar here last summer. It was the Everyone's Invited movement, and that was about it started off in private schools where loads of girls posted to this forum about experience of sexual assault within school, and how the fee-paying schools had dealt with it, which was basically completely ignore it, especially if the boys' parents were contributing a lot of money to the school. And it's so interesting because prior to that, there had been a report about sexual assault in state schools. I think it was in 2018, and there was a report made to the government to say this is actually a significant issue that needs addressing within all schools. There needs to be better policies, because from one school to the next, the way they deal with it is completely different, and very often it involves telling the girl that she should wear a longer skirt, or sending the boy home for one day, or conducting their own internal things. And so there'd been this massive report to the government, which they just ignored and did absolutely nothing about. And then the Everyone's Invited movement started last summer. And because it was fee-paying schools, it was really picked up. It was discussed in Parliament. It was, it made press headlines everywhere, and it was taken really seriously, and it has begun a really important conversation about the way that young people are treated, and it's so poor that schools are not. I think there is this thing. It's almost like when it's two teenagers, they see it as tit for tat, silly kids playing around. They don't see that girl getting her breast grabbed as a sexual assault. They just don't frame it in that way. They see it as silly, gropey kids, but hopefully things are changing as a result of that movement. It's really interesting to see that that's now carrying over to younger kids in the US. I hope it is worldwide.
And in India, because they had that I think it was 3 million women holding hands at the same time to protest sexual abuse.
Oh, wow.
There's an awareness, and now young women go on groups in a bus, and if someone gropes one of them, they all beat him up. which is a nice idea.
Fantastic.
Right. Yeah. Japan has the women only trains
Yes.
to
So they
prevent,
don't get
subway gropings.
Mm. But,
Yeah.
people backlash against that as well. There was this whole big thing online about the women-only gyms, and all these men were like, what? How dare they get their own space? What about men-only time? There's so many people who still just don't want to see it. They don't want to see that this is just like an everyday
occurrence.
It's just all day, every day for all women, and until men begin to say, oh, actually, yeah, we see this, and very often they don't get to that point until they have daughters of their own. Men who are very not all men will have daughters and then suddenly be like, oh yeah, let's have some women only spaces. My daughter needs to go into that. But prior to that, you were happy to shout, get your tits out of your van at girls,
Yeah, and it's a moment, I think the basic thing that they get out of it is a moment of ascendancy over someone else. Because if you are not frightened and intimidated, it loses its fun. And I learned that because once on the subway, I was watching this man was sitting down, and a big, strong woman with a leather jacket. She looked very tough and impressive. She had a big black bag. And as the train rocked, it was rocking in the face of this little guy. And so he poked her, in the side, and she got into a fighting stance and she screamed, "You motherfucking cocksucker!" and flipped her finger, her hand right in his face. And then when I was horribly molested and took karate and became a karate champion. And when I was outside my karate studio, these 5 teenagers came up and one of them goosed me. And before I knew what I was doing, I was screaming, "You motherfucking cocksucker!" and flipping my fists and, getting ready to rip their scrotums out, which I had learned in karate. And so they ran up the street and I chased them for about 2 blocks till I realized, holy shit, there's 5 of them. They're running into their own neighborhood. But I impersonated that rage, which karate really helped me to summon so that I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I think their thrill is that moment of intimidating the other. And once when I was walking up the subway steps, when I was much younger, I was in grad school, a guy behind me goosed me and I whipped around. It was a teenage boy. And I said, "Why the hell did you do that?"
What's goosed?
Where you grab their ass.
Ah.
And he hung his head. And I said, "Why did you do that? What gives you the right?" And he didn't talk. He just hung his head. And I said, "I spared you this time. Watch out." And left. But it was that he hoped to be a guy.
Do you know what's interesting about you saying that? I just did a thread earlier this week on my Instagram about indecent exposure. Because I had received a number from a complete stranger. I received all of these videos and pictures of him masturbating, and they were very explicit, like ejaculating and all sorts. And I reported it to the police, and I gave them everything on this guy because I have some very computer literate friends who were able to basically just hack into his life. So I got his date of birth, address, phone number, absolutely everything.
Wow.
Reported it to the police and they just did nothing. they were like, oh, we knocked on his door, he wasn't there, so we're closing the case. So that inspired me to do a thread on Instagram about indecent exposure. And I mean, we call it flashed at, which again, I think that language, flashed at, it makes it sound like,
Cute.
oh, silly, flasher. But before the age of 25, I'd been indecently exposed at 11 times, and only one time was it taken seriously by the police. Most of the time the police didn't even come, and even that one time when it was taken seriously by the police, there was still nothing happened. They took it seriously, they listened to me, but nothing actually happened. The guy didn't get caught. So I asked other women for their experiences, and I got thousands of responses, but the vast majority, I'd say 80% of the experiences that were shared were people who were saying, I was 12, I was 11, I was, a teenager, I was a child. And again, vast majority of them, I think there was one or two out of the thousands where it said he was caught and he got taken to court. The rest of them were just either dismissed, or the attitude from police or their parents who they told were, oh, this is silly, an old man with his willy out, and I think that notion of feeling like this is just a sad man who's trying to get a bit of power, and if you turn around and go, haha, you've got a shit willy, or you've got a small willy, or whatever, or that is the way to deal with these things, when actually what's being missed is that kind of behavior, the grabbing on a pinching an ass on a tube, or getting your dick out at some random woman, or even sending pictures of your dick completely unsolicited. These things are not just a sad man trying to regain his power. These are stepping stones to murder. They are a precursor. We see it in so many sexually motivated murders, that the killer who's been caught, he didn't just go out one day and murder and rape someone. He started off with what we would call low-level offenses, but they're not low-level. They are incremental little things that teach him how fun it is to, and how
humiliate women on the
sure.
basis of sexuality.
Yeah.
I learned quite a bit from my daughter, who was a bartender for a while, for many years in New York. And she learned that what they want is basically ascendancy. And so she learned how to sexually totally humiliate them till they left the bar. And in one particular thing, which was so dramatic, she said this guy leaned across the bar and said, "Hey, honey, you want to hear a joke that'll make your tits get hard?" And so she stared at his crotch and she said, "You want to hear a joke that'll make your penis shrivel? Ah, damn it, you heard it already." And she said, they don't know what to do. She did that every time.
Don't you worry that some of them, I like that strategy, but I also worry that losing that power makes them more frightening?
Actually, she said she had a bouncer, of course, at the bar, and she never closed the bar alone. She always had a guy with her, a bouncer, when they closed the bar. But she said nobody ever tried to get back at her. They were so shamed that they left the bar. And even people that you would think would be vengeful, mainly their friends laughed at them rather than, and enjoyed ridiculing them. She said one black guy came over to her with a bunch of his friends and said, "Hey, ever try it with a black guy?" And she said, "No, did you?" And his friends all joined the laughter because the public humiliation, part of laughter is surprise. The sexual humiliation of a man is something women don't do. Or she'd say, if your dick is as small as your brain, you're in serious trouble. because they don't know what to do.
But then they go on to a bloody incel forum. You know what I mean?
And reclaim their ability to see it in their shame. Turn around and try to get ascendancy over shame by ascendancy over women.
Yeah.
And their own sexual neediness, which is sick.
Yeah. Well, it's an ability, isn't it? It's an inability to separate one woman from all women that seems to be, you know, I mean, I've been harmed by so many men in my life, but I love men. I adore men. I think men are bloody brilliant. It's part of the fucking problem. You know, I can separate the evils of some men from all men. Whereas I think that there is this real tendency for, and that's what's bred these incel and pickup artists and whatever communities, is this seeming inability to see individual women as individual women. We're just a homogenous group of bitches, you know?
Right. They can't.
I mean, you know, women are products to a lot of, you know, in the social imagination for a lot of, I mean, people are products, right? That's one of the aspects of, you know, like, I'm one of those people. I've been single for a long time. It's actually my preferred state. You know, like you have to be exceptionally compatible for me to want to be in a relationship, you know? So, but it's also like, I enjoy people, you know. One aspect of dating oftentimes is just like, a lot of times it's people kind of wanting a specific image or an outcome, rather than, like, you know, whether it's women or men. A lot of times, you know, people are going out and it's like, you know, you're actually trying to get to know people. You're not trying to necessarily get into a relationship, because that's an unknown.
Right.
Yeah. And that would be I think that's actually the healthiest way to date. I think if you're dating with this idea of, this is what I want at the end of it, then you can go for the outcome rather than making sure it's the right person to have that outcome with. And I think if we all saw dating just as a really lovely chance to meet other humans and find out about them and get to know them and just have a really fun time with them, then I think we'd all be a bit happier.
Much happier.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Liam, you haven't said much. I'm wondering how this is affecting you.
Well, I think, you know, the Instagram page and the book is perfectly pitched for completely dodging all this, you know, the bullets of the all men shit, not all men. Because, I mean, you make the point in your book, like, there's a lot of men doing a lot of shit. So, yeah, it's not all men, but there's a lot. And then there's stats in there that are just, you know, horrifying. And obviously it's different from the US, but I can't imagine it's probably any better. But it's like, you know, 1 in 3 women will experience domestic abuse. 2 women.
Same in the US.
Yeah, 2 women a week are murdered by their partner or ex-partner. A woman is raped every 6 minutes. So, like, it's bleak. So, yeah, I only recently learned the term heterofatalism. Someone in our Discord told me about it.
I've never heard that.
So it's the idea, which you basically have said in, you know, in other ways, that being a heterosexual woman is a prison because, you know, all men suck. But obviously that's not the case. That certainly with the book and the Instagram page, the impression I get is that, as you said, the problem is you like men, but there's a lot of men that are just
hateful,
ruining it for the rest of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, in terms of my own thoughts, I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know, you know, it's a very sort of tricky thing to navigate because, you know, I'm just perfect. So, but yeah, I just think, you know, just going back to some stuff you said earlier on about like online comments and stuff like that, like, I do wonder if the reason there is so much stuff online where, there's backlash stuff and people get riled up, is precisely because no one has any political agency. And that is the only space people feel that they can make some kind of difference.
That's a very good point.
And I'm sure you do take all this stuff with a pinch of salt, but I think I just think it's an expression of a wider problem that no one feels like they have control or agency over the fact that a lot of things are just shit. And I guess the question I'd have from that is like, how have you found dealing with all that stuff? Because, and I guess actually this is also a question for Harriet and Ikoi as well, because dealing with, emotionally disturbed people sort of day in, day out must be, it must take its toll, but maybe you're all just used to it because you're all, have years of experience. But I just, what's the sort of difference between, the social work you were doing before and then this work you're doing, which I assume is mainly through screens. I know you have like parties and stuff now and again, but I just wonder, how does that feel? Is it different? Like, what is that world?
It's very different actually, because there's this kind of, so when I was a social worker, I was not representing me. I was representing my organization. I was representing I was enforcing and working under the laws of this country and the guidance and policy that I was supposed to be. So I guess and I never gave much about myself away either. So even though I was having face-to-face relationships with clients and was developing relationships with clients, some people who I'd worked with for a long time, it was never about me, like they wouldn't know how many children I'd got or if I had a child or any of that kind of stuff. I was the organization. If anything went wrong, if they made a complaint about me or were abusive to me on the phone or at their home or whatever, I kind of was able to say, well, this is the council that they're upset with, because I didn't make this decision. So there was that kind of separation. And I felt safe, I guess, and protected because I was part of a big organization. I feel much more vulnerable now that I'm just me. And it's weird because nobody I've kept my anonymity purely for this reason, really, because I think if my face was out there, I'd feel much more vulnerable. But it's this weird sense of vulnerability because, it's just totally different from the social work thing, because actually now they know lots about me. I give away lots of information about my life, but then they don't know me and they don't see me because they would if I could sit next to them on a bus and they wouldn't know that they were sitting next to me. So it's kind of odd. And when I was a social worker, I had to maintain professionality. Now I can just tell people to fuck off, which actually feels quite empowering. I like that part, and because nobody can sack me. I guess it is, but it's interesting what you say actually, and I haven't really thought of it like that, which is that perhaps I need to think about it from a more therapeutic perspective, which is actually what I've said triggered in this person, because what's going on in their life and why do they feel that they don't have a voice anywhere else but here. And I do have to work actually on that kind of almost compassion for trolls.
There's this Instagram account, what's his name, Alok, I can't remember his surname. He always they always do like make a point of like replying to really vicious stuff in a sort of very public way, and it's just full of like almost sort of sickly compassion. It's almost just like, wow, this person has the full capacity to like completely zoom out and just be complete, sort of offer empathy to this person that seemingly doesn't deserve any, and that's exactly why they need it. So yeah, but I, it is the online space is sort of fatiguing, but I think it is an expression of something wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because I think if you show compassion for their obvious illness, you're taking them off the high horse of male superiority. You're making them pitiable.
Well, it's also
sorry, go on.
Oh no. Well, one of the things, because I've worked with a lot of men in my capacity as a counselor, and one of the things that I've always emphasized, because a lot of times I've said that people don't necessarily have a substance use issue, they have a relationship use issue that drives drug use, right? And one of the major things is, especially in terms of working with a lot of men, has been kind of because a lot of the resentment, I think that stays subconscious, is because patriarchy makes men extremely dependent on women.
Yeah.
Right? It's not one where men necessarily have this independence, because also so much about your status is about access to women, having being desired by women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so at the end of the day, there's patriarchy it has a element of dependence. And one of the things that I've always emphasized when working with men has been that, you don't have to buy into this dependence of women. You also have value that has nothing to do, just as women have value that has nothing to do with men, because that's one of the things that I often, because one of the things about the dominant submissive relationship in patriarchy, right, is that, it's not a cooperative relationship, it's a dominance relationship.
Yes.
Whether that's in the workplace or whether that's in a personal relationship space, that is kind of the dominant structure in our society. And one aspect of working with people is hey, you don't have to buy into this. And that in order to really cooperate with somebody and collaborate with people, which is what, a good friendship, a good relationship should be, ultimately, is a collaborative, cooperative relationship, then you can't you have to have a certain element of independence in cooperation.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is about fostering these independence within people.
Yeah, I also
If that
think
makes sense.
that is very much related to what you're saying, which is profound and important, that because childcare is so devalued in our society, boys as well as girls grow up in a matriarchy of mothers, babysitters, childcare workers, nurses, and so on. And so their most impotent, powerless lives are dominated by women, because it's their early childhood where they're totally dependent on women. And I think that they therefore, because of the segregation in caregiving, they therefore hold on to, both men and some women hold on to this idea of women as sort of omnipotent witches that they have to get back at. And that wouldn't change unless childcare changed.
Yeah, especially if, the relationship with the caretaker isn't, the women caretaker isn't necessarily good, right?
Right. It's dominating, humiliating. Right.
Yeah, that carries on significantly into life.
I've never thought of it in that way before, at their most powerless, during their most powerless years is when they are living under a matriarchal system. And so that's just made me really go, oh yeah, that explains a lot. if they had poor caregiving experiences during those times, you know, I mean, I obviously have made the connection between childhood and adulthood trauma, but yeah, I never thought of it in that way before. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, and that kind of also reinforces, you know, because one of the major aspects of like how genders are kind of socialized into dealing with pain and discomfort is whether they feel that it's, you know, their problem to solve, or whether it's somebody else's problem to solve for them. And to a certain degree, society kind of, you know, because what is the most appropriate response, you know, for in terms of gender socialization, right? With men, when it comes to pain, is to make it somebody else's problem. That is kind of the gender socialization. I mean, that's, you know, anger, right? You know, versus like with women, you know, we're socialized very differently to deal with pain. Right. And so that those kinds of messages in, you know, in addition to like the childhood experience of like, you know, is it your mom always taking care of you? Right. And then as you go on in life, when there's discomfort, there's along with all the gender socialization and the messaging that goes along with it, you know, then there becomes this expectation that women are supposed to.
Right.
You know, and that also breeds like this resentment and this dependency. Because ultimately, a lot of times when I talk to men, they do admit they're like, I don't know what to do with myself.
But
it's one of those things where it's like, no, this is a skill that is not necessarily innate that you can learn. Anyone can learn.
There's such big, powerful schools of thought now, or you know, like the wellness space, which is a massive space online, and spirituality and holistic healing and all of that. There is I see posts on a daily basis about masculine and feminine energies, and they ignore everything about socialization. They ignore everything about political systems and structures and all of that, and they boil it down to this very gendered, well, you are born with these masculine traits of dominance. You are born as a woman to be submissive, to be a nurturer, to be a carer. And I've seen some of them admitting to gender fluidity. So they'll sort of say, you know, you can have those energies regardless of what body you were born into, but these energies are what exist within humans, and they are unchangeable. And unless you lean into your feminine side as a woman, or you lean into your masculine side, then you'll never be living in your truth. You'll never be your true self. And it's so damaging, but it's such a dominant school of thought, which is very much indoctrinating a lot of young people who spend and get all their information, you know, online.
It is. And the emotional responsibility allocation to women in relationships is huge. That it's women who are supposed to ask what's wrong. It's women who are supposed to carry the emotion in a couple. And usually for a lot of women, a lot of men, the only person with whom they emotionally confide is a sex partner. A woman. It's different with gay men who are much more emotionally available. But for a straight man, it seems all out of masculine character often to emotionally bond. I've been struck by a woman in the ladies' room, in the bathroom, can say to a woman, oh, another woman, God, do I look fat in this? I'm having an awful day and all that. A guy would not do that. He wouldn't confide in another man. I feel so sad.
Yeah.
I feel so lonely.
I mean, there is the limit. I mean, there's the strict quarreling for especially for straight men, in terms of like affection of any kind is only acceptable within a sexual romantic relationship.
Right. That's right.
The
but soft side can only come out with the reassurance that you are in a sexual relationship, so you're a real guy.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of videos coming up online at the moment with where men are showing each other, caring for each other, hugging each other, being emotional with each other. And I cry every time I see them. And it will be such simple, basic things like a friend will come in and say, how are you feeling today, buddy? And they'll both give each other a big hug. And I find myself like sobbing and weeping just at the sight of two men being gentle with each other. And it's a really sorry state of affairs that people have been talking about for a long time. And I can't believe that in 2022, we're still at a stage where it's like really progressive for a man to give his friend a hug when he's feeling sad. I sound really sort of pessimistic, but this is why I keep feeling like, how long is it going to take?
It'll take a while, but there's a guy named Jackson Katz.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Has wonderful videos for men. And I think there is pressure from women and from some men to reclaim the emotional privation from which men have suffered. And I think if we present it as a terrible privation in the male gender, that it might help, because it is. You're not a whole person then, just like you're not a whole person as a woman without your agency, your aggression, and your anger.
Yeah.
And so if we present them as unfortunate, I think that might help.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know people listening to this, like what their experiences are as men listening to this, because those statistics don't lie. It's pretty bleak, the ones I spoke about earlier. But my experience of being a man has been not repressed. I've got lots of friends that I talk to about feelings and hug and all that sort of stuff, and it's all good. But it's only really, in time that you realize sort of how everything is structured and how things actually are, and that your experience isn't universal. And, it is disturbing.
It is
because
disturbing.
You need, you need to be in contact with your feelings, because if you're not, they'll come and fuck you.
Did you ever feel that you needed to conform or like to an alpha male ideology or anything like that? Was there ever a point in your teen years or younger years where you felt that pressure?
I think the thing that's funny about the alpha stuff is if you actually look where it comes from, it's some study this dude did about wolves, right? And then it all turned out that they were all captive wolves. Yeah. And so in nature, in reality, wolves don't behave like that. So when people go around saying, "Oh, I'm fucking alpha," I'm like, okay, so you're a zoo animal.
Yeah, right. That's a very good point.
So did I ever feel pressure? Yeah, I mean, it was everywhere. It's, it's in the movies, it's in comic books, it's in TV shows. And actually, that's a whole other bit that would have been fun to talk about, is all the sort of Love Island and Married at First Sight Australia stuff, because I think that's all part of that cultural background radiation that you should be in a relationship. And I think one of the sort of, key points in your book is, you have this line, you don't just get one shot of being great before you expire. You're not a banana. And I think, and I think not only is it a great line, but it's true. You have to wake up to this sort of cultural pressure that's pushing you in this direction that maybe, you're not necessarily ready for or prepared for all the shit that's going to potentially come with it. So I think, I know the book wasn't sort of designed for me, but it was, I thought it was great. So,
I really want men to read it. I don't want men to feel excluded from it. I think, I hope that it helps to change men's you know, I hope it helps men to have a bit of insight into all the crap that we're dealing with, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Now I'm going to have to go. It's now
Yeah.
12:16.
Yeah.
We really need to thank our wonderful guest, Lala. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
These are crucial issues.
It's been a lovely conversation.
Thank you so much.
Normally I go on podcasts and everyone's just like, tell us the red flags. And I feel like a broken record. So this was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
By the way, listeners, if you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on WBAI at 2:30 EST on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.